Good morning. Today is indeed a historical day for the Portuguese-American community. Today we begin to better define the Portuguese-American political agenda. We asked our esteemed panelists to cogitate on a few issues. First, how do we get more Portuguese-Americans elected or appointed into offices? What difficulties do they face? What challenges do they have to overcome? And what solutions do they have for those challenges? Second, we asked them about the Portuguese-American political agenda. We have been strong on supporting the teaching of Portuguese in the United States. We have been strong in supporting issues that relate to relations between Portugal and the United States. But we also need to think about the American issues that are Portuguese-American issues. So what is it that is American, that is of particular interest to a community with the social, economic, demographic, and cultural profile that ours has? Related to that, a step that possibly we can consider is the creation at the national level of a political action committee. New York has already created a political action committee. Will be well served by creating one at the national level and in other states as well. I had asked them to show a map of the United States where I took data from the Census Bureau and plotted it in accordance with congressional districts in the United States. And as you can see, we have a very strong presence in the traditional states of Portuguese settlement: Massachusetts, California, New Jersey, Hawaii. But the Portuguese population is getting increasingly mobile, and as Angela said, we are everywhere in the United States. And as the decades move by, we will become increasingly more mobile. And then we should think about what it is and how we can mobilize the voting power of the Portuguese throughout the United States to have a truly national strategy to increase our presence and our influence in the American political system. And I will give you our panelists. I will start with Congressman Costa, and then Congressman Devin Nunes. He has to leave before the panel is over, so that's what he will be doing. And then the Honorable Chief Justice Phillip Rapoza, and then President Carvalho. They each have 8 to 10 minutes to speak, and then we open the floor to questions from the audience.
Be able to ensure that I see everybody. Good morning.
Good morning.
Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Tudo bem? Tem muito problemas agora? Come to the right place. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here with the PALCUS conference and to be with this distinguished panel to share part of our collective experiences as Portuguese-Americans that reflects our pride, our culture, our heritage, and our values as Americans of Portuguese descent. And clearly I want to thank the Foreign Minister and the Ambassador and all the distinguished guests who are here today. And what a terrific turnout to see so many Americans of Portuguese descent from all over the country. We are part of that diaspora. And notwithstanding the map that our moderator put out there about the East Coast and the West Coast, I can't speak for all Portuguese, but I can speak for, I think, the majority of Azorians. We like to be near the water. Right? But we're moved, because that's our history. It's part of our incredible history over 500 years. I wanted to just kind of, they asked me to give a little bit of background on how my experience is, and then I'll try to answer the questions that our moderator posed to us in terms of the challenges that we all face to get more involved, to be advocates, and to make our voices heard as Americans of Portuguese descent who share these common bonds that I described earlier. My experience, I should say my family's collective experience, like your families, have similar themes, especially for 70 to 80% of the Portuguese in California who owe their origins to the Azores. And clearly we all have a different story to tell, but there are a lot of similarities in the stories because, as we know, the migration has taken place over 150 years. Getting ahead of it, that bottom photograph is taken in 1922 in Devin's district near Costa, California, where my father was born. And that's photograph sits in both my offices in Washington and Fresno, because I think whatever modicum of success one may have in life, you should never, as a colleague of mine, Frank Constantio, once told the foreign minister, movement, forget where you came from. The foreign minister at the time was obviously not from the Azores. But on that harvester is my father and his two brothers. They were 11, 10, and 7 years of age. My grandfather's one of the gentlemen sitting in the middle. And I bring that because that diaspora started in 1897 with my father's side of the family. My mother's side of the family was 1904. And my four grandparents, like many of yours, none of them spoke English. Of course, for most immigrants, they did not speak English. They spoke Portuguese. And three of my four grandparents were illiterate their entire lives. My father born in Congressman, my mother born in Corcoran. And as my father used to like to say, he graduated from the college of hard knocks. Or in the 6th grade, he had to quit school with his brothers to work. That was trying to save up enough money to buy a dairy. There's two primary industries in the Azores, fishing and the dairy industry. My family didn't fish, so you know what we did. But the fact is that they worked hard. And the picture above that is my grandfather and my father and the three brothers. I put that picture there because it reflects a progression. They had worked hard. They were first-generation Americans. And they had achieved some modicum of success. That picture, interestingly enough, not that we were, that I could ever tell, long involved in that, but it talks about Portuguese joining other organizations. My father and his four sons joined the Knights of Columbus, and that's the picture that was taken. They joined the Knights of Columbus. I don't know that they were many suits, but they all had suits on that day. And, but it's a reflection of that progression. The next set of pictures that we have here, and it shows the first picture in 1978, ran for office, California State Legislature. And that other gentleman there was Tony Cuomo. Neither of us had the Arctic blonde that you see sporting today. So I was 25 at the time. And, but it was really a part of an assimilation for myself, for Congressman Phillip, who was the first American Portuguese to sit on Congress, for subsequently later, Richard Palmer and Devin Nunes, South, Vale, that we all kind of followed in those footsteps. But it was really a reflection of the Portuguese communities in California, and specifically in the Valley. There's a previous picture that I'm going to go back to. No, that's not the one. I made it, okay? That picture is in the Museum of the Ebony, and I wanted to close on that with the picture of Secretary General Cortez, because he was Prime Minister in 1997 when I was in state legislation. I was honored by the Portuguese government to be united. So I've never met a Portuguese president before, and I'm honored to be one. I'm enjoying that honor. The fact is that how do you get involved? You get involved because, first of all, your family's involved. My family being involved in some fashion, I would not have been successful. There are the Portuguese organizations that predated Caucus that still exist today. Fraternal and sorority organizations that my parents and my grandparents belonged to. The lodges, the Portuguese-American organizations that have been dominant both in California and on the East Coast. Those were networks. Those were unofficial networks. And they, with our economic success in agriculture, the dairy industry, allowed us to branch out. Neither of those of us who got elected in California, whether it's a state legislature or a Congress, would have been successful if we relied totally on the Portuguese communities. Our success, I think everyone will concur with this, in part is because we had a base to start with, but then we reached out to other communities. And there were tremendous other communities in the San Joaquin Valley, Italian Americans, Armenian Americans, other immigrants from all over the world. And we were successful. I've been successful because of my ability to connect with these other ethnic communities and with the other industries, which obviously in the San Joaquin Valley are dominated by agriculture. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell. Obviously, as co-chair of the Portuguese Caucus with distinguished colleagues of mine, we work together on trying to deal with the repurposing of lodges. We work together on the bilateral commissions that we are involved in. Okay. You were very powerful. And currently, we're working on the E2 visa effort. We did further build as the foreign minister has indicated on the importance of growing trade between Portugal and the United States. So to sum it up, I have Devin, if you wanted to go first, you can go first. I'll take 35 minutes. And I took more time than I should have, but I am honored to be here and I'm honored to continue to contribute. PALCUS makes a difference. Your involvement and your participation in PALCUS only allow us to grow the Portuguese communities and our influence throughout the United States. And after all, that's why we're here. Thank you very much for the time.
First say thank you to Jen and David Valadeo, who we'll see later this evening. They chair the Portuguese Caucus, and they do a great job, great work on behalf of the relationship between Portugal and the United States. So thanks for all you and what we do. You'll see David tonight. If you've never met him before, you'll see that he's actively being recruited to be the center for the Portuguese national team in basketball. He's the tallest Portuguese-American in the country. So you'll meet them tonight, but they do a great job. Minister, Ambassador, let me thank you for putting on this great event. I'm sure you all think this is a great event. It's so nice to see, fortunately, many of you I've known for a long time, but there's folks that I'll meet new today, this evening, that I've never met before. Like I didn't know any folks from Indiana. So I look forward forward to meeting you and talking to you and sharing our common heritage. Let me, I'd like to, first, I don't know if anybody is here from Artesia, but last week we lost a great friend of ours, John Martins, who passed away. He was supposed to be here. So my condolences to his family. He was a really great guy. He did a lot for the Portuguese community. I know we're all going to miss him. So I'll talk about how we got involved. Jim kind of glossed over it. You know, the one thing that Tony Coelho and Richard Pombo and Jim and I and Ms. Cardoza and Dave Valadale all have in common, other than we're Portuguese and families from the Azores. None of us want to milk cows anymore. That's a secret. And I always say it's the BS around here is just a little bit different. But all great guys. We've all worked well together over the years. And the great thing is that even Tony Coelho and Richard Pombo, even though they're not Congress any longer, Dennis Carvalho, they continue to be involved, very much involved in Portuguese activities, and they're always ready to help out where they can. So, just talk a little bit about where I see. I'll talk kind of maybe the higher level about what I work on here in the Congress with Jim's help and others, and that is to strengthen the ties between the transatlantic ties between Portugal and the United States. Portugal now has committed that they're going to get to their 2%. They'll be one of the very few countries that will reach their 2% in NATO. It's something that that this new administration has put as a requirement for being active and having an active, strong NATO. And so, Minister, congratulations on those commitments, and I think we'll make them stronger. But beyond that, as Portugal expands its economic zone out to past the Azores, Portugal really becomes the neighbor to the United States. And we already have agreements in place in terms of how we patrol the Atlantic, how we rescue ships in the Atlantic or rescue people who have troubles out in the Atlantic, and that's only going to go stronger as Portugal rebuilds its Navy. So we have spent some time looking at the rebuilding of the Navy, and you have new vessels that are being put in the water. Portugal has a long tradition, as we all know, of having a strong Navy, and it's very impressive what they're doing. Now, do the United States expect Portugal to build an aircraft carrier? No. But can Portugal build very good ocean-going vessels that can help the United States and have a bilateral relationship to help patrol the Atlantic, to help look for Russian submarines, to help look at the entrance to the Mediterranean, to go down to the Gulf of Guinea in Africa? Absolutely, Portugal can play a very important role in that, and they're committing to do that. And I think this relationship is really growing. And it will be what Jim and David and I continue to work on here in the Congress, to work with our administration and to work with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and your Defense Ministry to improve these ties. And we also have, I know I saw the Deputy of Mission here from Lisbon. Our number 2 in Lisbon was just here. But Ambassador Glass, if you haven't met him, he's from Oregon, but he's a great guy, and I think he's going to be here this week, right? I think he's going to be here later this week with the President. So if you haven't had a chance to meet him, he's very gracious. He loves being in Portugal, and I think he's going to serve our country very well in strengthening these ties. So I will close just with a quick story because, as you all know, the Azores is really the capital of Portugal. Sorry, Ambassador. And I always tell the story. My wife doesn't like me to tell this story because she's very quiet. Actually, her former professor, Denise Borges, is here, so he knows how quiet she is. She doesn't really like politics, doesn't talk very much. But one time I got her a little upset at a Portuguese event because I gave a little speech and I talked about how San Jorge and Pico were some of the greatest islands, and because that's of course where my family's from. And my wife got up and said, "My husband's right. San Jorge and Pico are good islands," but she said Terceira is the very best island. Because, of course, that's where her family is from. And Jim, of course, agrees with her. But thank you all very much, and I look forward to taking your questions and seeing you this evening.
Elizabeth's family is from Crusader, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were encouraged to prepare remarks, which I've done, but I feel, given the presentations we've just heard, that I have to speak up with respect to my own roots to provide some kind of context here. As Vasco Ratu said, it's not your grandfather's Portugal anymore, and what we have represented here is not only people from all over the United States, but people from the many waves and generations of immigration. My family came to the United States between 1882 and 1909. I have my grandfather's Portuguese passport, which is this beautiful document with the royal seal on it, framed and hanging in my living room. My parents grew up in New Bedford, speaking Portuguese, didn't speak English until they went to public school. I grew up in a primarily English-speaking home, and went to the Escola Oficial Portuguesa in New Bedford, which as a child of 10 I absolutely hated, but as with many things that your parents urge you to do, it was the best thing they ever did. So with that, good morning, everyone. I should also add, when we talk about geography, I totally concur with our two congressmen that the Azores constitutes the capital of Portugal. But unfortunately, they omitted to name the island which stands out in that regard, which is the island from which my grandparents came, which was San Miguel. All right, now that I've got the crowd on my side, let me start by saying how much I appreciate the opportunity to join my esteemed colleagues in discussing this morning's topic. My fellow panelists are from the legislative and executive branches of government, and I will be sharing my reflections as they relate to the judicial branch. As we all know, the legislative branch makes the laws and the executive branch executes the laws, but it is the judicial branch that interprets them and determines how they are to be applied. As a result, our state and federal appellate courts deal with important matters involving both our lives and our liberties, and the selection of judges who are charged with that responsibility has a significant impact on how justice is rendered. Our trial courts, in turn, apply the laws enacted by the legislative branch and interpreted by our appellate courts. In doing so, trial judges must also contend with the effects of challenging social conditions in the cases that come before them, such as increasing levels of violence and the deepening drug crisis. It goes without saying that the selection of judges who pass judgment in such matters is of great significance to us all. Given the importance of the judicial role, it is appropriate for us to consider the extent to which Portuguese-Americans are represented on the bench. Time does not permit me, however, to outline the different ways in which judges are selected across the country. They range from lifetime appointments made by the president or a state's governor to service for a term of years, either by gubernatorial appointment or in some cases by election. That said, to what extent is the Portuguese-American community represented in the ranks of the judiciary? Permit me to answer that question with respect to my own state of Massachusetts, which has a combined total of 410 appellate and trial court judges. And how many Portuguese-American judges are there currently in our state? The answer is as simple as it is sad. One, a recently appointed juvenile court judge. I don't suppose that much more needs to be said that Portuguese-Americans are underrepresented in the Massachusetts judiciary, especially considering the size of our ethnic community statewide. Looking at it from another perspective, were Portuguese-Americans represented in our judiciary in the same proportion that they are represented in our state Senate and House of Representatives, Massachusetts would have between 13 and 31 Portuguese-American judges, not just one. This is significant because to discuss the integration of Portuguese-Americans in the judiciary in any meaningful way first requires that there be an adequate representation of our ethnic community on the bench. That is clearly not the case in Massachusetts. Although my information is largely anecdotal, I fear that our experience in Massachusetts is not atypical and that Portuguese-American communities are underrepresented in the judiciary nationwide, even in those areas where we constitute a significant portion of the population. Without doubt, those Portuguese-Americans currently serving as judges do so with distinction, such as Justice Maria Araujo Khan, who was appointed to the Connecticut Supreme Court last year. The point I'm making here is that we need more such examples of Portuguese-American legal talent on the bench throughout the United States. Now for the more challenging questions. First, why are Portuguese-Americans underrepresented on the bench, even in areas where we have a significant presence? And second, how can we as a community, especially those of us pursuing careers in the law, promote a greater representation of Portuguese-Americans in the judiciary? Let me turn to the first question, being why we have relatively few Portuguese-Americans on the bench. As a starting point, we must remember that the universe of people who can serve as a judge is limited in a way that participation in the executive and legislative branches of government is not. Using Massachusetts as an example, a potential applicant for a judgeship must satisfy certain basic professional requirements, such as having a Juris Doctorate degree, being a member of the bar in good standing, and having at least 10 to 15 years of legal experience. Moreover, a serious judicial candidate must exceed those minimum requirements, distinguishing himself or herself through significant professional accomplishment in the legal field or some form of noteworthy public or community service. This necessarily limits the pool of potential applicants because developing such a professional resume takes considerable time and effort. Having said that, my sense is that the number of Portuguese-Americans attending law school is growing, expanding the number of our ethnic colleagues pursuing a legal career. This is significant, of course, because without Portuguese-American lawyers, we can't expect to have Portuguese-American judges. When I became a member of the bar 42 years ago, Portuguese names were few and far between among those practicing law in my area. Over time, the situation has improved markedly, with a discernible increase in the number of Portuguese-American lawyers. This, in turn, provides a larger talent pool from which future judges may be drawn, which represents a significant step in the right direction. The fact that a lawyer has a distinguished legal career, however, does not mean that he or she will become a judge. If an attorney wishes to serve on the bench, that person must put his or her name forward to be considered for judicial office. You do not get a surprise phone call in the middle of the night telling you that you are going to become a judge, no matter what you may think. Applications for judgeships are kept confidential, so it is hard to estimate the number of Portuguese-American lawyers who have applied for judgeships in Massachusetts. Based on the available information, however, I believe the number of Portuguese-American judges in our state has been restricted, at least in part, by the limited number of qualified candidates willing to put their names forward. There may be several reasons for this, including the obvious fact that once a lawyer is appointed to the bench, he must give up his or her law practice and all the opportunities and financial rewards that it may involve. I recall one instance where I was speaking to a very successful Portuguese-American lawyer and trying to encourage him to apply for a judgeship. And he looked at me and he said, "Judge, I would love to serve on the bench, but not yet." Perhaps greater emphasis should be given to the public service aspect of a career in the judiciary, especially among Portuguese-American lawyers who are otherwise active in civic activities. Serving as a judge will never be as financially rewarding as a successful law practice, but a career in the judiciary has its own rewards that, in my mind, far outweigh any such financial limitations. Indeed, there are very few professions in which one can touch as many lives as does a judge, who can bring justice and sometimes mercy to those who otherwise would never experience either of those things. Another factor is whether Portuguese-American lawyers, especially those interested in judicial careers, have done the same kind of groundwork that lawyers from other groups perform, including participation in professional activities that support the practice of law and promote the legal profession, such as state bar associations and judicial nominating committees. These organizations and others like them constitute both the formal and informal networks that can influence the appointment of judges. Failure to participate in such activities amounts to a lost opportunity to engage in, if not influence, the judicial selection process. It is also significant with respect to the selection of judges that across the country there exist numerous specialized bar associations representing groups based on ethnicity, race, and other factors. Indeed, Massachusetts is typical in this regard, having bar associations organized by lawyers from the African American, Asian, Hispanic, Italian, and Greek communities, among others. In the past, there was an unsuccessful attempt at a Portuguese-American bar association, suggesting that, to date, Portuguese-American lawyers in my state have not done the same kind of groundwork necessary to advance their interests that we see lawyers from other ethnic groups perform. This leads to the second question that I raised. How can we as a community, especially those of us pursuing careers in law, promote a greater representation of Portuguese-Americans in the judiciary? Answering for myself, I am strongly of the view that the time has come for the formation of a national Portuguese-American Bar Association. The establishment of such an association with statewide chapters, where appropriate, would provide a tremendous boost to the influence of Portuguese-Americans in matters involving the law, the legal profession, and the judiciary. Although an effort to form such an association on the state level was not successful in Massachusetts, my understanding is that better results have been achieved in Connecticut, which currently has an active Portuguese-American Bar Association, and there may be others around the country of which I'm unaware. The role of such an organization at the national level, however, would be a comprehensive one, providing professional support and encouragement for its members, as well as advocating for the Portuguese-American community nationwide in matters of significance to it, including, but not limited to, the appointment of judges. Before closing, I would like to address one further question with respect to the number of Portuguese-Americans serving in the judiciary. What difference does it make? What difference does it make that we don't have more Portuguese-American judges on the bench? Let me answer plainly. It makes a big difference, but not merely for reasons of ethnic pride. The profile of our ethnic group is no doubt enhanced by the accomplishments of its members. Service in the judiciary is a significant achievement, and every member of our ethnic community stands a little taller when one of our number becomes a judge. I would like to suggest, however, that there is another equally significant reason to hope that more Portuguese-Americans will be called to judicial service. To do justice and to be perceived by the public as doing justice, our courts and the judges on them should reflect the communities they serve. This is part of the bedrock upon which public confidence in our judicial system rests. The public has the right to expect that judges will bring to the bench not only their education and training, but also their whole being, meaning who they are and their entire experience in life. Judges are the face of the community in the courthouse, and while we want judges who are legally skilled, we also want men and women on the bench whose judgment will be informed by a first-hand familiarity with the public they serve. This is particularly true with respect to our trial courts, and there is no question in my mind that it makes a big difference in Portuguese-American communities to know that the judge in the courtroom is named Aguiar, Silva, and perhaps even Rapoza. That is not to say, however, that cases should be decided based on ethnic favoritism. Far from it. Rather, it underscores the fact that the judiciary upon which we all rely must understand the community of which it is a part. At the end of the day, however, the importance of doing justice and treating people fairly is not just a Portuguese-American issue. It is an issue that affects all ethnic and racial groups in this nation. In a society as diverse as ours, there should be ample room for everyone at the table, and when we speak of the judiciary, ample room at the judge's bench as well. In seeking to achieve this goal as Portuguese-Americans, we cannot expect others to do the job for us. We will no doubt require the cooperation and assistance of others, but the initiative must come from us. And I sincerely hope that with this inaugural conference, we will take the first step. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I feel the need to tell you that I'm from Lisboa and that I'm proud to be an oficina. I know, we're very top Açoriano heavy here today, right? So I am in awe of the presence that I am in. I want to thank all the elected officials that are here and the PALCUS board for bestowing this honor on me, especially Annabella Mello Cruz, my municipal prosecutor, and Elizabeth, who said, you have to do this. And I said, oh my goodness, I don't know. I always tell everyone I am bottom of the fishbowl politician because I am just that little, I'm the pebbles on the bottom of the fishbowl that work to get things done. I have spent most of my life getting people elected. That's what I do, and that's what I do well. I'm proud to say that I have helped many Portuguese people get elected, and one of the reasons is because I'm grassroots. I do what I do because of my Portugal Day Committee, my Lions Club, my Portuguese Club, and my soccer club for the kids. I live in a city that's 12 square miles of population, 140,000 people, and only a quarter of them go to the Elizabeth Public Schools. So in 2014, I was asked to run for the Elizabeth Board of Education. I said, you know what? I've hit a wall. I help people get elected, and it's time for me to do more for my organizations. We had, at the time, a Portuguese councilman, Manny Grova, and Manny said, you know what, we need more. And I said, all right, let's do this. I have no problem. I have nothing to lose. My stars are aligning. I have a pension in government already, so hey, let's go. So I did, and I became the first Portuguese woman to ever be elected in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And I said, there's something wrong with this. There's definitely something wrong when the mayor of your city tells you and stands in your Portuguese club and stands in your Portuguese church and says, you Portuguese people are the hardest working people that I have ever met. You are the root of our city. You are the builders. You are the business owners. You are the pride. And yet we have no representation. So there's something wrong. So, you know what? Me being the mom, the wife, the sister, and, that little oficina from Lisboa, I said, we've got to make a change. So we did. I was elected. In my first year, I learned a lot about what wasn't being done for our children. A lot wasn't being done. And I'm a believer that if you raise your children right, and if you raise them right, they don't forget where they come from, and they come back, and they build your communities. Well, we're doing that. We in Elizabeth teach Portuguese starting in the 6th grade. You have the right to take Portuguese and learn how to speak Portuguese and visit our schools and visit our churches and be involved in our community and be a part of it. Our Portugal Day Parade, if you've ever watched it or had the pleasure of coming to it, has more people of other nationalities who come to support us than it has Portuguese people. And that fills my heart because people respect who we are and they want to know who we are and they want to be a part of us. But what does that do? That also makes the elected officials who are there say, wait a minute, they're all trying to take over. Well, let me tell you a little bit about what we do at the Board of Ed. My first year, we learned. I sat back and I watched. I realized that we do not have enough representation there. The second year, every year there's an election, we put another Portuguese young lady on the board, Stephanie Gonçalves. She was elected highest vote counter of that term. The third year, I said, we still don't have enough. And you know what? They say that Portuguese people, what do they bring to the table? They bring hard work, dedication, and money. Unfortunately, the teams are Hispanic, African American, and Portuguese. So we have a seat. But what is our job? We have to fundraise and we have to work hard. And we don't have a problem with it, so we do. So at the Elizabeth Board of Education today, if you haven't noticed, I'm your glass half full person. We have 3 elected Portuguese women. We have an assistant superintendent. We have many, many Portuguese teachers. I'm proud to say that our transportation director is Portuguese, that our special needs director is Portuguese, and that also that our bilingual director is Portuguese. So we are making a dent there. If you're telling me that we're not chipping away, we are, but we need more help. We need more support. We need people who are sitting in this room to say, don't get stuck in a rut. Don't stay at that level. We don't have representation outside of our bubble. And that's why I think you have all of these elected officials, and then you have someone like me saying, help me, help others, help us get more, help me help those. I think we have 27 in the top 50 students graduating next week from Elizabeth that are in the top 50. They're Portuguese, they're ours. You know, help us empower these students so that they could come back and make a difference in this world. We did make history this year. The chairman of our freeholder board, who was one of my youth group kids, and I know Doc's here and one of her kids, is Sergio Granados. And this year, he is the chairman of the freeholder board. Our president of city council is also Portuguese, Councilman Manny Grova, who is the president of city council in Elizabeth. The president of the Elizabeth Board of Education is me. The chairman of our special needs is also Diane Barbosa, elected Board of Education Commissioner. And the chairman of our plant property and who controls construction is Stephanie Gonçalves. Our president of our PBA in Elizabeth is Portuguese. Our fire captain is Portuguese. We have people in our health department. Our superintendent of public works is Portuguese. And we are everywhere, people, but we're crying for help. We're crying to be more. We need state level, we need Washington level. We need you to come in and say, we recognize that you're working hard. We recognize that you're empowering our children, but we also recognize that we are in a rut and we are not moving forward because our community is working hard to empower others and not empower us. So thank you for listening to me and to my rant. But I hope that some of it sits with you. Thank you.
We open the floor to questions, and please keep your question to 30 minutes. Yes. 30 seconds.
I'll definitely keep it to less than 30 minutes. I'm Andrew Figueredo. I'm a university student at McGill University up in Canada, originally from Kansas. I'm that guy.
Kansas.
And I first wanted to just say how inspirational you all are to me and everyone at this conference, frankly, but especially those elected leaders, because to me it means a lot to see people like me in government, people advocating for my interests in my community and my background. And I wanted to ask specifically, how do you think we can get more Portuguese millennials involved in politics? Because I look around this room and there's quite a few young people. There's not quite as many as I would have hoped for. How can we get people that are sometimes sadly losing their language, losing their connection to their culture, to maintain those ties to their culture, but also to bring that into office, to be able to bridge that gap between being Portuguese and being American, and to get involved in civic life and public life?
So, if I may, one of the problems that I see in my community in Elizabeth is that in the other communities, The Hispanic organization has youth organizations that has young Democratic or Republican leaders. They have like the youth squads that go out and empower other youths. The African Americans, they do it from the churches, which is something that is completely against our Portuguese churches. They would never tell you who to vote for or help to empower the youth. Look, it really is up to someone like you to say, I want to start something, I want to do this, and get it out there. You know, we have Portuguese clubs in our schools, we have organizations, and we do little bits, but there's not one person who's going to take the lead. So you know what? Take the lead and send it to us, and we'll move it.
Let me add, I think that's an important point you made in terms of getting young people involved. Part of the tradition, I think, for Portuguese-Americans, like many other immigrant groups, is in our country, you assimilate, but while you assimilate in the second and the third generation, it's harder to maintain those ties. I mean, in my parents' generation, it was very common, and the majority of that first generation married fellow Portuguese. Of course, in the second and third generation, obviously that begins to change. And therefore, keeping the Portuguese organizations together becomes more difficult. But there was always the notion, very strong among first generation and carried on to our second. If you had some success, you were expected to be involved and give back. And I think that's been certainly the Portuguese tradition throughout our country. Those of us who've had some modicum of success, you get involved and you participate and you give back, just as you have with your school board and the other activities that you've been a part of, as I and my family. My dad, with his limited education, got involved with a friend of his who ran for county board of supervisors, and he was his treasurer for 20 years. My mom was involved. I grew up with that. So I thought, you know, but let me point out, besides the clubs, youth efforts, I think, that are very important. I was talking with the ambassador. When I walked in, I met some of the interns that participate with the embassy. We have an active internship program in most congressional offices. I have a Costa scholarship that's part of my alma mater at Fresno State that Denise, well, I don't know where Denise went, but in now almost 14th year since I've been in Congress, we've had over 66 interns, the Costa scholars that come here every summer. And one works in Devin's office, one works in David's office, one's in mine office, and then a fourth we can sponsor. We have enough stipend to cover 4 in the summer. But I work with Leon Panetta, who's a good friend of mine. He has a Panetta Institute, and they sponsor internships in all 23 of the state universities in California. And it's a more intensive program. It's a longer program. But we sponsor internships throughout the year, not just the Costa scholars in the summer. That's another way to get youth involved.
Another question?
Hi, my name is Natasha Silva. I'm a staffer on Capitol Hill, and I also represent the Congressional Portuguese-American Staffers Association. I'm originally from Massachusetts. I'm originally from Massachusetts, and I'm from New Bedford. Parents are from San Miguel, and I grew up with a lot of Portuguese-American politicians, state-level politicians, who have been my advisors and mentors. And when I came to Washington, I was inspired.
Group of them around here.
Yeah, Senator Rodriguez, Rep. Cabral, have to shout out, and Senator Pacheco, and the rest that are here.
Good friends.
But when I came to DC, I was inspired by federal level. So Secretary Moniz under the Obama administration, yourself, Congressman Valdão, and also Nunes. But I don't see any women. And so what can we do at the state level to encourage more Portuguese women to come into federal office?
At a local level, I can tell you that it's very difficult, very, very difficult. One, being Portuguese and a woman is not easy to begin with. And I think all the women in the wife guilt, the mommy guilt, and playing in the big boy world is not easy. It's hard. It really is. It's hard, you know, when you have to make those decisions of whether you're going to raise a family or you're going to be a politician, and how to balance those two things. And to find the right mentors. And you know what? You're definitely surrounded by them. You know, you need to make the decision yourself on what you want to do. And if that's truly what you want to do, you're definitely in the right room to be empowered. And I don't think that there's a woman in this room that won't say that we will back you and help you and push that fight to get you to where you want to get. But you have to make that decision first. I speak for myself, the mommy guilt and on the wife guilt, and having to, again, play in the big boy world. And I apologize for all the men elected officials, but it's hard to be a woman in your world. But once you make that decision, you make that phone call, girlfriend, and we will come from all over the United States, and we will empower you and get you to where you want to go.
Could I add something on this? Even though as a judge I was not elected to hold the positions that I held, because in Massachusetts it's an appointed judiciary, to the extent that we're talking about advancing women in careers, I would report to you that at this stage in the United States there are more women graduating from law school than men. And when I talked about a talent pool for future judges, never mind a talent pool for future lawyers, obviously, women are numerically getting to have exceeded the tipping point where they exceed men in terms of numbers. I know numbers alone do not achieve the goal, but I think something that Congressman Costa mentioned earlier, and which I think you just mentioned, was the fact that if everybody in this room who has been successful and has achieved just looks back over their shoulder, reaches back and pulls somebody up with them, I think that makes a big difference. I know that as a judge, and then eventually as Chief Justice of our Court of Appeals, my court, when I joined the appeals court, there were 2 Portuguese on the court, me and the janitor. That was it. When I left the appeals court after having served there for almost 20 years, half of that as Chief Justice, I was on the court. We had the director, administrative director of our court was Portuguese. We had 2 Portuguese law clerks. My administrative assistant was Portuguese. And it was not a matter of ethnic favoritism. It was a matter of tapping into a talent pool that had never been recognized. So I think if we keep that in mind, those of us who have been successful, that we do owe our community something, and to consider them for positions that come within the scope of our ability to affect those kinds of decisions.
Well, and you said something also about mentoring, and I think that's important. A lot of what's taken place previously is rather kind of anecdotal in terms of the fact of how we have succeeded, but PALCUS really can serve, I think, as we use American baseball terminology, of helping develop a bench. And developing a bench is really a part of, you know, a kind of a strategic effort, I think, that needs to take place, especially among young men and women of Portuguese descent. I learned a long time ago from the Evals, you want to get something done, you have strong women. And I'm a product of the Evals, Costa and the Evals. Don't get in the way of a strong Portuguese woman, I tell you. But that has to be carried forward, frankly. I mean, to the new generation, yourself. And there's a lot of, but we've never really kind of formalized it and strategized. Let me just find a bit of humor, though. President Obama used to tell, you talk about appointed positions. He said, Costa, he says, you know, he says, no president has put more Portuguese in high places than I have. He said Secretary Nunes, he said David Simas, he said Pete Souza, and then he'd tell me, don't forget, Bo, the Portuguese water dog.
that everyone here consider bringing their high school and college-age children, nephews, nieces, neighbors, because like you, I brought my daughter, who's an upcoming senior in high school. They will be inspired, and they will want to be involved, and that's the way to build the pride and to keep it moving forward.
We have time for another question.
Hi, Angela Simoes, PALCUS. PALCUS has a podcast, Politicus, for those of you who aren't aware, where we interview elected officials at all levels, from city council and school board all the way to the federal level. And part of the purpose of that is to hear stories and be inspired, because I think part of the problem, one element is that people might think, well, I could never do that. I could never run for office. So I'm wondering if each of you could comment on, yes, we do need more folks at the federal level, but how do you get started, even if it's running for city council, and how do you help some of the younger generations, or anybody for that matter, overcome the self-doubt, that voice inside that says, well, other people can run for office, but that's not something I could ever do. How do you help them overcome that?
Well, as I said, I'm not an elected official, but at least within the context of my own experience, I think that something Angela just mentioned is very important, which is it is very difficult to see yourself accomplishing something unless you can envision yourself doing it. And the best way to create vision, or that visioning exercise, is to see other people of your background doing what it is you might wish to do. So the mere fact that we have a Portuguese judge or a Portuguese congressman or a Portuguese school official, you, by your mere holding of that office and hopefully serving with distinction, you provide that kind of vision, that kind of model that allows somebody to say, he can do it, I can do it. So I think that in and of itself is very important. But I think personal encouragement, I had, as many lawyers, I don't want to say most, but as many lawyers, I had always thought it would be great to be a judge. That would be something I could really do. But it wasn't until a Portuguese-American judge called me to his office and said, I'm thinking about retiring, and I think you would make a wonderful judge, and I want you to consider applying for my position. Now, had he not done that, there's a chance I might have done it, but there's a chance I might have said, not yet, I'm not sure if I have the qualifications, the credentials, and he retired. I applied for his position. There were 150 applicants for the job, and I was selected. Not because he was Portuguese and I was Portuguese. In fact, being Portuguese meant I had overcome great mathematical odds in Massachusetts first becoming a judge. But that was significant, and had he not done that and reached out to me, I would not have taken that course.
Well, and Judge, you're a role model. And, when in the 80s, I was fortunate to be in a place in the state legislature where I got
A number of my friends involved. Judge Silveira, we got appointed in Tulare, and we got Judge Dennis Caton and Judge Jean Gomes, who just recently passed away, both to the Superior Court, and Judge Gomes ended up serving in the Court of Appeals. But 3 Portuguese judges in the area there. But again, it's a judicial appointment, and of course, with political support, you can make these things happen.
So I want to try to answer the question. I think if you're going to run for public office, there has to be a reason and a purpose for it. You can't just do it to run. And I also believe that what sets us apart as Portuguese people is while we try to empower our community, we also do a lot of work to empower other ethnicities, which help us make us the strong community that we are. So have a purpose, don't forget who you are and where you come from, and make sure that when you get there, you don't forget why you're there. Because to run just to run, stay where you are.
You're absolutely right.
You can say your question, but we don't have time to answer it. But if they want to ask, people then individually can answer you.
Well,
Why to make a question if I cannot get an
You can go to them individually and ask them. Just reflect. I mean, if you want to, it's okay.
Well, good morning. So I'm Bernardo Guarmo with EDP, and I serve as well in the U.S.-Portugal Chamber of Commerce, and a proud representative of the small but vibrant Texas community, Portuguese community. My question is the following. So you shared very impressive life experiences and background, which are very inspiring to me and to all of us. And you have shared many of the things you have done for Portugal and for the Portuguese community. I would like to ask the question the other way, which is, can you share a little bit from on the political spectrum, on the justice spectrum, on the school spectrum? So what has the Portugal and the Portuguese community, so all of us, done to help you in your public lives? And since it's an open question, how would you compare with similar colleagues from other European communities? We'll be very interested in knowing what we do best to make your lives easier, because it's very inspiring and impressive what you have achieved.
3-word answers.
3 words, Judge.
With all my legal training, I'm incapable of a 3-word answer. But I'll put it this way. It's very important to the people who make decisions about appointing judges that they know that who goes onto the bench is of importance to the Portuguese community. When I was a judge, I was appointed, and this goes beyond 3 words, but I'll talk faster. Governor Salucci, whom I knew, contacted me directly, and he asked me if I could prepare a report on the number of Portuguese in Massachusetts. Now, he came from Hudson, a very heavily Portuguese community, and he was familiar with the Portuguese community, which he represented as state senator there, but he wanted to know the size of the Portuguese community, and to him, that was a representation of what significance appointments to the bench would mean to our community. For me, I've been tremendously supported by our community. People have gone out of their way to, I don't want to say endorse me, but approve of my career in a way that it's inspired me and hopefully has had some result, some positive result in terms of the appointment process. So I think the Portuguese have to make it known that it's important to them that they have more judges.
I'll definitely have a larger conversation with you afterwards, but what I can say is that if it was not for the Portuguese community in my town, I would not be an elected official, both financially, and they all come out to the polls. The Portuguese community is the swaying factor in Elizabeth, and if they come out to vote and they support you, you will be elected.
There's nothing magical about politics or success in this country. I mean, hard work. It takes people, resources, people, money. You got to put the financial support together, and and so the Portuguese are not short of hard work. We do that part well, and putting people together and organizing them in a way that is effective is critical, and then being able to put together the financial resources, which is a different situation here in our country, but absolutely vital. And then obviously having the ability to network. And those are the ingredients for successful advance in politics. I mean, and the Irish community and the Italian communities and all of these communities have worked within themselves, and they've expanded, and they've been very successful. And I think the Portuguese community is attempting to do that in an organized way. Let me just say, because Congressman Nunes and I wanted to make note, and he said, make sure you make comment. We lost a dear friend of Portugal here in the last month, Frank Carlucci. Frank Carlucci was a key in the changes that occurred in Portugal in the 1970s. Always a believer and a supporter of Portuguese, and understood the history of Portugal and the role that it played now today in modern Europe and in politics throughout the world. And we lost him, and we are honoring him with a congressional resolution. Maybe there's something that we might do together with the Portuguese government to pay special note to a friend of Portugal, an American who understood the value and the importance of the Portuguese in Portugal. So I think we all want to take note of that. And I thank Congressman Nunes for making sure that I remember to remind all of us of that. And I was also told by the Portuguese ambassador that Portugal plays next week Iran, and I don't know where he's hosting the party, but we're all anticipating that it's going to be a good one.
Let's have a round of applause.